You're listening to Curiosity Invited with David Bryan here on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, my name's David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Curiosity Invited. My name is David Bryan, and today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Simon Gowen, a name some of you may know, but probably many do not. Simon is, well, these days, Simon is a speaker. He is a Wim Hof breathing and ice bath instructor, which we will absolutely speak about. He's also the creator of the toe touch method, and I think the founder and proprietor of the SG way, right? And so Simon, thank you for coming and doing this and being willing to give up your time and talk about this, because it's not the usual stuff. I mean, maybe in California it is the usual stuff, but I have mentioned it to several people, not here in Wyoming, but who live elsewhere, and none of them knew anything about it. So do we explain what it is that the Wim Hof method at breath, et cetera, is first? Or do I ask you this question, which is, did you grow up, sort of wanting to dive into cold things or wanting to control your breathing? Or how did you get to where you are right now?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on the show. It's
Great
a real
pleasure.
privilege. And I loved in the introduction that you mentioned the toe touch method. So I'm super passionate about that. I want to make sure that we give that some airtime.
Well, I think that's true. Absolutely. There's so many people who cannot.
So yeah, with the cold, I think I've always been attracted to the cold. And obviously I'm from England, and it gets, not super cold there. It's not like the Arctic, but it does get cold. And I've always preferred operating in colder conditions. Although it's only really recently that I got into ice bathing and Wim Hof breathwork. So it really, honestly, was sort of quite a surprise to me, like it is to some of the people that you talk to, that I find myself now working as an instructor, guiding people through breath work and cold exposure. It's been truly an amazing experience and life-changing one for me.
So you're putting those two things together, and that makes sense to you. But so breath work and being in the cold, so obviously they go together. But how do they go together?
Yeah, so let's go back about 3,000 years. And so
I know you're way, you look young for your age, but you're not that old.
Exactly. I think we've been out a bit, haven't we? But maybe not that much. But 3,000 years ago, people were breathing, right? They were doing breathing. It's pretty much the foundational element of most practices, particularly spiritual practices. And also 3,000 years ago, people were jumping into cold waters. The Romans, the Greeks, they were doing it.
You mean as a practice, or just
for
because
health.
they lived in for health?
Yeah, I think for health, and so there wasn't necessarily a marriage between the two formats, and people were practicing independently, but these sort of modalities have been around for a while. But I think what Wim Hof has done really well with his method is that he has the pillars, and there's three of them. And the first one is the breathing, and he does a Tumo style breathing, which is a very active style breathing where you're taking deep almost like a controlled hyperventilation. So you're breathing fast.
Could you say again what you said? He has a what style of breathing? A two what?
Tumo. So,
Tumo.
yeah. So Tumo is from it was, I think it was sort of made famous in a way by Tibetan monks who practice a form of Tumo meditation, and they have a ritual whereby you get doused in after years of practice, you get doused in cold water, and then you're put out into onto some Himalayan peak with, at minus God knows what temperature, and they use this breathing mechanism to raise their body temperature and heat up their clothing, and then when it's dry, they can come back inside. That's kind of like the sort of a test of their ability to control their physiology.
Oh wow.
And so Wim adapted his own version of Tumo, and so the Tumo meditations practiced by the monks is a very sort of slow, controlled pattern whereby utilizing breath to connect internally and then to control the internal organs, your temperature, your physiology. And Wim's method is does a similar control of the physiology, but the mechanism is different. So his mechanism is you do fast breaths which produce adrenaline to the body. So you're breathing very actively, like 30 to 40 fast breaths, and so that's activating your sympathetic nervous system. And in that sort of, let's call it a primal state where you would normally be preparing to run away from something or to go and attack or whatever, right? That flight, freeze response. You're produce adrenaline in that state, and so you're consciously producing adrenaline. And then during the relaxation phases where you stop breathing with Wim after exhale, so you take the last breath, let it go, and then stop, and then you relax, and then you start going into the parasympathetic state. So during that state, what happens is it's a sort of marvel of the human physiology, because during the forced ventilations, we're really increasing oxygen in the cells. So just really oxygenating the cells, the pH in the body and the blood is going to go down, which creates this alkaline type of environment in the body. So inflammation response markers go down, which is beautiful for healing. And then also through the breath work and the parasympathetic, you're playing around with the vagus nerve, which helps calm you down, right? So you're getting into this nice state. And so his breathing stroke meditation, because in many ways it's a meditation as well, really works on the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So you're going deeply into relaxation. Now, what becomes powerful is that after prolonged periods of breath hold without air in the lungs, the reptilian brain, so let's say after about 2.5 minutes of breath hold, the reptilian brain thinks that you are dying, for want of a better word. Let's make it easy for the listeners to understand. So it's because oxygen levels are starting to plummet, right? So in the lungs, the oxygen levels are going down. So if I had an oximeter, which is one of those attachments that you have when you go to the doctor,
Yeah.
and you put on your finger and it says, "Okay, David, you're 98%, you're good, we're
Right.
okay." Now, if I were to put one on you and took you through the breathing pattern, after about 2.5 minutes, that number would go down to around about 60.
60.
60, yeah, it goes
Wow.
low as that. Now, in that state where you're depleted of oxygen here, right, and I'm tapping my chest when I'm doing that, but you've got oxygen still in the cells.
So the cells are not oxygen starved. They're still
So yeah, so
flush
those
with
levels are
oxygen.
going to go down, but nothing like they are here.
Yeah.
But the reptilian brain starts firing off, saying, "We need to kickstart things here, right? We need to get going. We're in trouble." And so it releases bliss chemicals like dopamine and serotonin into your body. So, but you're doing it under control rather than a state of stress.
So you're in
Yeah.
some ways you're in a super relaxed state, and your body is kicking into gear as if you're about,
Exactly.
right? You've got to get things moving. And that raises your body temperature?
Well, actually, it's very interesting. People have different responses to it.
Hmm.
People can get cold actually during the retention phases. I think during when we're doing that controlled hyperventilation, typically people would get warmer. Yeah.
Hmm.
And then what we'd also do though is after the period of when you're holding the breath, finally then to breathe in, take a deep breath in, and then hold it for about 15 to 20 seconds. And that does release heat and energy into the body.
So, I mean, if you told somebody to do this now, can somebody hold their breath for 2.5 minutes right away? Or is that something that most people have to work up to?
Yeah, I mean, I would say most people would work up to that.
Yeah.
What really depends is how good you are already at managing your internal state.
Hmm.
If you're
Hmm.
someone maybe who's practiced meditation or you're naturally calm as an individual, the chances are you can have a pretty long breath hold to start with. So it's not so much about lung capacity, or that may be a factor, but the biggest factor is about your ability to relax.
Hmm.
So let's call it the monkey mind on most people is firing off.
Right.
What's going on today? Did I do the shopping? Who's doing this? Work emails.
Sure.
That's the
Right.
biggest challenge. It's not really about ability. It's more about, how you are about with controlling your mind
Hmm.
and going deeply into your body.
So this is obvious to you. But what to what end? Why do people do this? Why did Wim Hof sort of explore this? You now mentioned spirituality, I think twice, and and yet it's a very physical process. So how did you get drawn to it? Were you always a sort of is this a spiritual seeking practice for you? Or I know you were an athlete from a young age, and then some. You're still at a young age, so but
Thank
how,
you.
how did you get how did this come to your life?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and I think it's also going to answer your first one as well fully about how the breathing and the cold are connected.
Yeah.
And also, it's for me, it's been almost a lifelong journey. I've most of my career has been in health and fitness. So I was a gym owner. I was certified as a trainer. I train trainers and how to train clients. I've worked with thousands of people on a physical level. And I think one of the things that I've sort of wrestled with, and many trainers have done as well, is that when you're training someone, you're dealing very much with the physical,
Hmm.
and that's your job. But we're human beings, and so stuff comes up, but we're not therapists, right? And then on the other side of the coin, we have people that are therapists, but they're not addressing the physical. If you go to therapy, it's very much here. So the level that it's being dealt with is in the realm of let's say, the physical, which is your relationship and experience, the mental, which is going to be your processing of those experiences. And whatever that processing is, that's going to lead to a emotional response, right? So you would feel something about that. And so, my journey has been really sort of centered around this relationship, of how I can work with someone in a physical way, a training modality that they can make changes in well-being, not just about how fast you can run, right? Or how you look on the scale, or whether you've got 3% body fat, right? The sort of the normal fixations that people would come, but
Right.
really, on a deeper level, what is your level of connection? What is your level of self? What are the fears that you have going on in life? And so my approach
Mm.
is very much to utilize um, the breathing to create alignment and to promote the most effective internal state and physiology. The cold is a mechanism to create clarity and insights, and also to prepare you for something called hermetic stresses. And a hermetic stress is going to be an environmental stress. So, that can happen at work. Your boss comes, or you can be cut off on the freeway, or whatever it might be. But those are sort of stress points, because in modern life, we do not have the stresses that we used to have 1,000 years ago, when you were basically living to, eating to live, right? And if you didn't eat, you didn't live, or you could get killed in any number of ways, and it was cold. And so what the cold does is, when you get in 32-degree water, freezing cold water, you get that primal shock.
Also,
It's like jumping out of an aeroplane, but you can do it just in, lake or whatever, but you get that shock. And so the training, and what I do with my clients, the training is how you can control that. So how you can go into the ice and be calm, rather than freaking out and then jumping out, which is what happens, right? So so a lot of things are happening in there. One, you need obviously a powerful intention to stick with something that is brutally cold and merciless. You also need to have trust and faith that you can, your body's going to work. And then there's obviously the training in the cold exposure to be able to handle prolonged periods in that. Typically, someone would start at 1 to 2 minutes. But for example, this weekend I took about 4 or 5 people through 20 minutes at 32 degrees, just sitting there. And that water's colder than Arctic Norway is.
Wait a second. So these are 4 or 5 folks, regular folks, and they're sitting in 32-degree water for 20 minutes.
Yes.
And they've built, not obviously, they've built up to this. They've worked to achieve this somehow. But here's the piece that's still, so you didn't come to, maybe you did, but this is a question really. Did you come to be a gym owner because you were interested in this kind of whole being, well-being, or did you come to be a gym owner because it was a business and you were a physical guy and health was important and people go, to work out, and you eventually came to a deeper or more expansive understanding of well-being?
Yeah,
clear.
It's such a great question, and I think simple answer would be that the gym would be a progression. And I think my journey into health and fitness honestly sort of started with, yes, I was interested in it, but it was also a mechanism for me to deal with a very stressful childhood. I grew up with a bipolar mother. Dad left when I was 5, so nature and exercise were beautiful ways for me to get out and to and I found solace there. It was my sanctuary, my safe place. And that was really the start in my journey. So I always had a very positive aspect around exercise, and I didn't really use it for the way that I looked. I just like being in nature. I used to, like running in the hills, and that's still my preference, is to walk now in the hills. I don't run so much. It's not calling to me anymore. I've done years of it. And so that sort of journey, I guess the progression of that was then to realize that you can't run away from your feelings or the problems. And so I started to look into mechanisms and ways to feel the feelings, and I explored things like therapy, I explored coaching and all this stuff. And I didn't really find an approach that worked for me. I didn't do great at talk therapy. I found going to sort of personal development workshops, I would go and I'd be like, come back all fired up, and then 2 weeks later I'd be like, was I supposed to do this or that? It just didn't work. And so what I love about the breathing and the ice is that you don't need anyone else really. Maybe a guide to hold the space. And I'm really a guide or a facilitator. I'm not a guru. I'm not a therapist. But you just get in the ice and you know do the breathing, get in the ice, and stuff comes up.
Oh, no
You know,
kidding.
yeah, and then that becomes your curriculum. But you're doing it based on, and I think this point thing is really important. What I came to realize that my nervous system was out of whack. It was dysregulated, and in my sort of anecdotal experience, and I think what a lot of the evidence shows in America right now with the crisis of anxiety and depression was going on in the youth and older people too, you know, is that a lot of people are suffering from something very similar, these broken attachments leading to dysregulated nervous systems. And it shows up as anger, anxiety, fears, or whatever it may be, but they're there. And so for me, being able to, it took about 6 or 8 weeks of practicing the breathing. I retrained my nervous system. And then once you've done that and you're in alignment, then it changes your consciousness, your level of consciousness. And you operating at a different level of consciousness, you start to become aware of more things that are going on, how you're operating, what's coming into you. And then, you know, we talked about the spiritual aspect. And that to me would be, what are those intentions or things that are causing you disturbance in your mind become the things that now become your journey, not the goals of the sort of physical world, the ego world, which is about how much money you make or what you look like or who's doing what, right? And so it's a completely different journey. And I believe that journey is what leads to great well-being. Because at the end of the day, you know, when you're lying on your deathbed, what you really care about is the love and connection, the people in your life, right? You don't care about the Maserati. It might be fun for a few minutes, but you don't care about that. So on the sort of journey progression as me as a trainer, I'm now for example, if you're an athlete, you might go and hire a sports psychologist, right, to help you. Well, what about with psychology? If that's sort of, let's say you're going to therapy, but it's not working, there isn't a physical component to that to deal with those feelings or even to dive into the sort of the soul-based world. So what I'm doing is creating a pathway for people to work on that in a physical way through the breath, through the ice, and then another area which is a sort of a departure from Wim Hof stuff, which is more the SG way that I've developed, which is around training in terms of fear and following that curriculum. And I'll give you an example. Was that my first time when I got into the ice?
Well, wait, so I want to ask about the first time. So I don't mean to cut you off. I don't want this to go away.
Yeah.
Were you drawn to and did things with ice and cold and breathing and then came to Wim Hof? Or did you bump into Wim Hof? You said, "Oh, I'd like to try that," and you tried it, and immediately you saw right away that this was somehow rich territory for you. How did you get there?
Yeah. So during the pandemic, my wife was going to have a surgery on her hip, and we previously talked about getting a jacuzzi. And so I said, now's a good time to get one. And if you're going to do that, I'd like an ice bath and also an outside shower and a sauna. And I think my interest there was that as a former athlete, I just knew that getting in cold water was good for recovery, right? And I liked the feeling. That was basically it. And that's been around forever, right?
Right.
And I didn't really, we had all this installed. We built this beautiful center at the back of my house, or at the time it wasn't a center, it was the ice bath. So I didn't know what to do at all. And my wife goes, "Are you going to get in, Simon?" And I'm like, "I don't know. So I went on the internet, probably like you did before the show, and sort of looked up, Wim Hof, this crazy Dutch guy and all the stuff he does. And so I did his breathing once. And then I said, right, I'm going in for 5 minutes. And I made that commitment to myself. And so I did it a slightly different way than you see on the videos on YouTube for most people. You know, you see people just sitting there and they go up to here or whatever. Well, what I did is I sat down and I went, just let myself fall straight back and went completely underwater. And I thought I literally thought I was going to die. I was like so scared. The only thing it was close to was when I jumped out of a plane. It was very similar to that, you know. And so, and then I just, you know, told myself and that I was going to stay in regardless, and that was my commitment, and I'm focused that way. So eventually, and it took, I don't know how long it took, but suddenly I was at complete peace, and I saw myself on top of this local mountain, Mount Baldy, a place where,
first time you're in this bath. This is
yeah,
the first
first time. And so, and I saw myself there calm, and I'd previously freaked out on the mountain because I previously was scared of heights, and they have something called the Devil's Backbone with 2,000-foot drops either side, and people die there every year. And I'd gone up there with my wife and kids and saw the ledge and just went in a complete panic attack and had to turn around. But in the ice bath, I saw myself sitting there like Buddha on top of this 10,300-foot peak that I'd never made it up to. And I was like, wow. And it was just a beautiful experience. I was so connected, and I was right there. And so I knew instantly, David, I had to teach this. I just knew it in my bones. And so I signed up the next day to become an instructor. I just went online and said, I'm doing it. And you know, and so that was really my sort of Wim Hof journey. Now the course was sort of 8 months after I'd signed up, because there wasn't running one. So I really started my own journey into becoming an instructor and leading it, and just playing around with the different techniques and inviting people around, and it was wonderful. And part of that journey actually connected me with someone who then took me up the mountain. We went up together, and you know, we were on this mountain, and I don't know whether he's been a guest of yours. I know you guys are connected, Dr. Habib Sadeghi.
I've asked him, and he's not quite there yet, but
Yeah.
I'm hoping you push him over the edge.
Yeah. So he's a, you know, an incredible man, and
he invited you to go up the mountain?
yes. And I was like, I don't, you know, I was like, you're kidding, aren't you? Because I've been looking for someone to take me. I literally been calling around trying to find a guide. I was going to pay someone to take me up who would keep me safe, because what I also did, David, after that first experience, is I started systematic height training. So it called me to then go and take on my fear, which is one of my sort of pillars of how I operate in my method. And so I would go to high buildings in Los Angeles, and I would sit and do my meditation, and people would look at me like I was crazy. And then I'd walk to the edge, and if I got too scared, I'd stop and I'd meditate, and I kept on going. And that was my pattern. I did it for months, every day. And so I had this invitation to go up the mountain. We camped the night before, and I didn't sleep. I was just thinking about the ledge. And then we got to the ledge the next day, and Dr. S said, take a video for your daughter. And she was going through something at the time, and I did this video for her. Very emotional, was crying. And then I turned around and I walked across the Devil's Backbone, and it was like walking across the room to you. I had no physical reaction at all. It was just like walking across the room. And in fact, actually, it was better than that. I was buoyed. I was elated. It was beautiful experience. And since then, I've had a healthy relationship with heights.
So I interrupted you a moment ago when you were about to speak about, you were beginning to speak about the SG way.
Yeah. So I think we've sort of, you know, and so to me, that is a really, what I would say, a physical process to improve health, but also to take on psychological challenges as well, like
Yeah,
anxiety,
you
depression,
mean health in
fear.
the big health in the biggest sense of the word. I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
because it
Yeah.
hasn't really been done before. If you think about it, it's sort of like from a, you know, I mean, you look at the word of psychology, the first part of it, psyche, is actually the soul, but you don't go to a therapist and talk about the soul, do you?
Unless it's my wife. Unless it's my wife you're talking to, because then
Okay, beautiful. And so, so there also isn't a physical. I know there's
yes,
a new sort of area in psychology called somatic psychology, which is
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
But there isn't really sort of you don't go outside the therapist office if you've got a fear of heights and he says, okay, you're not walking through a physical process. It's very much done
Mm,
up here. And
mm,
so, so my approach is to offer a physical process where the person can then solve their own internal, right, by recalibrating the nervous system. And then also, I think the sort of the the standpoint is that people are perfectly capable of creating what they need inside, right? Either the sort of the physical chemicals they might need for healing, or also for healing in the body if it's done with love. And I think a lot of the sort of the gateways to accessing that are by taking on the things that challenge you, that you're scared of, right?
sure.
Or the
Right,
conflicts that you might be having, yeah.
right.
And that's a real important part of training.
It's interesting, that piece. I mean, there's a way of approaching those things that are macho, right? Overcoming. And then there's a way of approaching that sort of feels like leaning into and making friends with whatever those things are. That's just a very different way of moving towards, as opposed to conquering that.
Unfortunately, that mindset is it's brittle.
Yes,
It only
right,
goes so far,
right.
and you got to learn, you got to be vulnerable, and in order to be successful and to really sort of access your true power, you have to be able to, to learn to let go, and that's a lot of the training is learning to let go. Because
Mm.
what happens in ice, which is very interesting, if you hold on, what you'll do is start shivering.
What,
And
what do
you'll
you what do
start
you mean
shivering.
if you hold on? You mean like
Yeah, if you're like this,
resist it? Like, oh yeah,
yeah, you're
yeah.
like this. What happens is you're also, what you're doing is, if you think about it, you're creating this energy of like, I'm holding on, I'm holding on. It's sort of like it's not a powerful energy. So you're almost weakening yourself by
Mm,
doing that.
mm.
Eventually, your grip's going to go and you're going to fall. Right?
Yeah,
That's what's going to
yeah,
happen.
because
Yeah,
how do
you
you
can't
overcome
hold it.
that? Oh.
But also, the body doesn't operate well that way, and nor
Hmm.
does the mind. If you tense the body, I mean, think about it. If you were to tense your body right now and try and move, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Whereas if you're nice and relaxed, the body works perfectly. It's the
Hmm.
cornerstone of most martial arts.
Hmm.
And it's exactly the same in the ice bath, because when you're tense and hold on, what happens is the brain tells the body that it's not quite safe. And so therefore, all the blood stays in your heart and it stays away from the extremities like your hands and feet. So after about a minute, if you're trying to be tough, what happens is you get really, really cold and it hurts, right?
Oh my God, I'll bet it
Yeah.
hurts.
Yeah, and so like you mentioned, women, and they tend to be more connected and less, prone to doing that. So, but when you relax, what happens is the brain goes, okay, we're all good.
Oh, everything's fine.
It's yeah, engages your, like the vagus nerve gets engaged, parasympathetic kicks in, and then the blood starts going to the extremities. And then you're like, I'm good. Yeah, so I've been doing a number of things. So, um,
Hmm.
I've been doing mostly individuals and small groups have been coming to me. I really didn't do any marketing at all. My intention was just to let whoever was going to come. And I've been so blessed because I've developed this and have this beautiful community, and amazing people have come. And then in order to expand the amount of people that I'm connecting with, I now work with corporations and do larger scale events, which has been nice. I'm going out into the world and bringing breath work to organizations. It's it's the easiest way to get healthy. If people breathe properly and even just once a day breathe properly, it would solve so many of their basic health problems. Maybe even get a lot of people off medication, and also great possibilities for people that maybe they hadn't imagined.
People have studied this. I mean, we can talk about the sense of well-being, but is it in fact, is it the case that people who are interested in hard sciences it's been demonstrated that this kind of work, whether it's ice baths or breathing, et cetera, actually has positive effects physically and otherwise on the organism, on the human organism? Has that been confirmed by the way that we like information confirmed? I mean, I can walk away with my own sense of well-being, but is there a sense that is there a pile of data that people need less medication? They do heal from things that they've been suffering from. Is there data?
Yes,
Excuse the expression.
and it's a great question, and I'm gonna talk about it from two different ways. So up until about 2012, there wasn't any scientific data around the ability to control the autonomic nervous system, which is comprised of your sympathetic and parasympathetic system. That was deemed to be outside of our control,
Yes,
and
right.
you would get a firm no from everybody, right? And so it was the Radboud study, which is a university in Holland, that they injected Wim Hof with endotoxin. So the normal, if you're injected with endotoxin, what you'd expect would be fever, sweating, diarrhea, and being really uncomfortable, and need medication in order to move through it. So they injected him, and also he did the breathing. They injected him with endotoxin, and then took a whole bunch of other subjects through it without doing the breathing. They all got sick. He didn't. So what they found was that he was able to control the autonomic system, nervous system, and to release adrenaline into his body, which suppressed the immune response.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So then that was the conclusion. So they wanted to go a step further. So I think it was in 2014 or 16. They then took a whole bunch of people like you and I. Wim trained them for 6 weeks in his method, and then he repeated the study. So you had Wim, his subjects, and then also the control group. Control group all got sick. None of his subjects did. They were able to create the same responses physiologically that Wim did. Now, since then, there's been multiple studies on cold exposure training out of the UK over 8-week periods, and I think that's just from 2 minutes of cold showers a day, having a massive impact on I don't know what scale rating they use, whether it's the GAD-7 scale, but on levels of depression and anxiety.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah. So, and there's been studies also at the Feinstein Institute as well. I think there's a large scale one currently on in San Diego as well, going on around aging and the impact on that and inflammation. So it's really just come to a head. Yeah, and Dr. Huberman, for example, talking a lot about it as, and so it's really coming to light just how powerful breath work and cold exposure are independently and also when utilized together.
It's so interesting, right? It's the the things that we think about as deprivation,
yeah,
right? That calorie deprivation. So there's all sorts of evidence about eating less and various ways of fasting, intermittent fasting can be long-term fasting, et cetera, et cetera. Taking away degrees Fahrenheit, right? I mean, taking away warmth, and it turns out that it's an interesting phenomenon. The things that we hold so dear and important, and obviously at some point they are, but
well, yeah.
but
And the same thing is very, very true with the breath. For example, we talked about retentions earlier. So what's being studied recently is that when you start going into these deep retentions, then inside the cells, some crazy stuff starts happening because with really long breath holds, the body then starts releasing EPO into the cells, right? It creates EPO. Now, you must know, everyone knows what
EPO
EPO is. Yeah.
EPO define
Right.
it.
Okay. So EPO is what Lance Armstrong took to win the Tour de France illegally. So it was erythroprotein. It was a drug that was originally created, synthetic drug created to help cancer patients because their red blood cell count is going to go down, right? So they would be injected and it would help them in recovery. It got utilized by endurance athletes because it increased their red blood cell levels. So therefore, they could create more oxygen in the body, it could go faster. So in the sort of, let's call it the sort of the death zone, when you're really low in oxygen levels, your body starts creating this. And you talked about the miracle of fasting. Similar thing happens as well after this magical 72-hour period of time when your body then it engages these cleanup operations utilizing sort of cells, that and clean them up inside the body, which is done naturally and beautifully, right? So it's a way of really dealing with sort of harmful cells in the body, all done on the edge of,
Right. Right.
but you're doing it in a way, but you're doing it safely.
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between taking yourself up a high mountain and being on the edge, right? Because that could be very, very harmful if you were to fall or whatever. But you're doing it in controlled environments can be very good. And I think you also alluded to one other thing. Yes, you talked about reducing calories, and so eating less is perhaps the most documented and effective eating strategy there is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Better than any diet someone can do. Yeah.
So is there an age either below which or above which this sort of approach to doing things might not be recommended, right? I mean, like, well, when you get to 85, whatever it is, or geez, I'm not sure you'd take a 10-year-old on this. Is there anything that suggests, a range outside of which that would not be a good idea? This would not be a good idea. And the other pieces, but let's just for argument's sake say, so these practices produce it's a state of well-being, not just psychological well-being, physical well-being, emotional well-being, sort of insight, whatever, for the individuals who participate. And I'm wondering, when you spoke about doing this for in corporations, is that about reaching more individuals, or is that about is there a larger plan in mind? I mean, is there some sense that this is producing a better world, or is it's producing a better world because better individuals make a better world, whatever that means? But like blizzards are a lot of snowflakes. So you create enough snowflakes, and eventually you get a big snowstorm. But or is there another story happening for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So firstly, I believe there's no limits for anyone. So any age,
Mm.
and you know, any age people can utilize the practices,
Mhm.
and so we're ageless really. The only the only sort of caution, if there was one, would be to be sensible if someone has any particular type of condition that might be
Sure.
adverse, right? Like
Sure.
some sort of heart condition or
Yeah.
pregnancy or something like that. Um,
Mm.
and so, I think honestly for me, I think I'm fine. I'm working out the answer to your question. I feel a strong calling to provide a sort of a physical mechanism for people to work through hard stuff and get stronger. I also align myself with the sort of the paradigm of that, you know, we're a soul-based being having a human experience. And I think that, you know, sitting in love and compassion and building community and connection would make the world a lot better. And I'm just a small, part of that. And I don't really have any expectation for anyone else to do what I do.
Mhm.
I think my focus is more on is just sort of, I have a sort of mantra. I always want to do the things that I would ask anyone else to do first. So I'm sort of, I try to live that. And then I'm just really passionate about providing opportunity for people to experience it, and they can make their own decisions. That's
Yeah.
kind of how I operate. And just want to have a vehicle people to try it, and if they like it, great, and if they don't, that's cool too. Because there's
Ha-
so many different ways to go.
has your family, like you mentioned a wife and kids, has your family, have you dumped them in the ice bucket, or are they
Well, you
exploring
answer
that as
you
well?
asked the science question. And so my daughter was totally resistant to it. She's like, Dad, you've lost your mind. You're nuts. You're a quack. And there's no, and so also though, she started her own podcast called Science Unscripted, and she's just an amazing individual and so intelligent. And so she comes to me after 6 months. She goes, Dad, I've researched the vagus nerve, and there's actually some validity to what you're talking about. I'm going to start breathing. So she now does it every day with me. And, and then, and my wife, she had a surgery, as I said earlier, and it transformed her recovery.
Ah,
And so she goes in, she's a little, and so we're kind of like a family doing it now. My son does it as well, and so it's really beautiful to
has this become a practice for you? Like, is it whether it's daily or weekly or whatever it is? I mean,
daily.
it's a daily. So every day you do both the breathing and the
Yeah.
ice work.
So it's interesting. We talk about the sort of evolution of sort of how I train people. So my morning routine used to be I'd get up and swim, run, or bike. And and now my morning routine, and my wife and I, we do this together very often, is I'll breathe for 20 minutes, and then I'll get in the ice for 5, and then I'll start my day. And I feel better than I've ever felt.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
now, David, if I choose to exercise, then I just pick something I like to do and I enjoy it. And it's very freeing. I don't feel like I need to do it to change my state of mind. I don't feel like I need to do it for my health, even. Although I
Ah,
am an advocate of
yeah.
doing exercise for your health, and I weight train most days and do aerobic training, but it's not sort of, I don't feel that drive to do it. I don't feel like it's not a have to for me.
Hmm.
I do it because I want to and I recognize the benefits of it. So
Hmm.
it's become a sort of, I think previously for me, it was a sort of an unhealthy mechanism for dealing with stress. It was my equivalent of drinking. right? I
Right,
exercise, right?
right.
So being free of that and really just being able to sit in, it's been very nice, and it's a lovely way for our sort of family to exist too.
That's fabulous,
I
actually.
think if the one area that I'm very passionate about is helping kids. So, as I said earlier, when I was a kid, I didn't really have any support, so I used to go run. So kids are really suffering right now. And so I started doing events. I have someone I've been mentoring who is 15, and he leads these events rather than me because kids don't want an old guy doing that. They want to connect with someone their own age who's also been through or is experiencing what they're experiencing.
Yeah.
So we've started doing events for kids, and these kids are incredible. They come in and they're open about their fears, their concerns, and they still do it. And it's beautiful to watch them after they get out the ice bath. They're like, I did it. I feel so good. I feel like I can handle more things, you know? And so that's just been beautiful because these kids don't have much stress. They have stress in their life, but they don't have much natural stress that makes them stronger because everything's laid on a plate. We've got air conditioning, we got clothes, we got food, you got Uber Eats, right? All this sort of stuff, helicopter parents. And so, so by providing them something that's a little scary, but also achievable, they do it. They feel powerful, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We would be remiss if we did not give you an opportunity to talk about what is the toe touch method.
Oh, I love you for asking that. So, okay, and I think, I don't know the demographic of your audience, but this is for people, my gift. It's on YouTube for people over 50. Because I got hurt. I played the parents soccer championship, right? And and we ended up winning it, and we're the oldest parents, and we played 5 games of 20 minutes. And I was like a raging bull. I wanted to win that, and we won. And so anyway, the next day I couldn't walk, and I'd injured multiple parts of my body, the hips, the knees, everything. It was like literally, I thought someone had just shot me. So I went to the chiropractor, and I had for 6 months. I went, and I also had massage once a week. And after 6 months, I still couldn't walk without pain. I went out. I remember literally walking with my wife. We were walking the dog around the block, and it hurt to walk. It felt like I wasn't in my body. And I said to myself, Simon, you're an exercise physiologist. You've done this for 30. Trust yourself. I started doing toe stretching where you're sitting on your toes. And it's a yin stretch where you sit in there for about a minute and it stretches the toes out. And so I just looked it down, and the theory is called bad neighbor theory. If your toes typically they are because of shoes, if your toes get locked, it then makes your ankle joint get locked. And that's supposed to be able to move freely, right? But it gets locked. If that gets locked, it then goes into your knee. If that gets locked, it goes into your hip. So you can see how one part affects the other. So I think, well, I'm going to start at the beginning, and the beginning is the toes. So I started doing yin stretches, which is prolonged periods of tolerating discomfort in the toes. Then I started doing the reverse. So I was rolling backwards onto over my ankles, so stretching backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And then I developed this knee stretch off of the wall. And so I did it, and in 2 weeks I was running again.
Oh.
So then I thought, okay, I'm going to test this. So I invited people who couldn't touch their toes to my house. And in 5 minutes, and I have not been, I've been tested on this, and in 5 minutes, I've got any single person who's come and done the method, and you can go to YouTube and try it yourself. They've been able to touch their toes.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great.
Beautiful.
Well,
Lovely.
well, Simon, thank you so much for being willing to chat. And Blake, hey, it's right on time for you.
Beautiful.
And I really appreciate the conversation. And I'll see you some Friday down the road. And who knows,
Thank
maybe I'll
you.
be in your backyard sometime.
It feels like it's calling to you, but thank you so much for having me on. I've loved it. Great to talk to you.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
My pleasure. All right.
You're listening to Curiosity Invited with David Bryan here on LA Talk Radio.